everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. What difference does 40 years make? Today we're gonna find out with Maker's Mark. What's up everyone, the Drink Pro here. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep liking, subscribing, sharing these videos with your friends, joining me on the Patreon. Any way you can support the show is incredibly helpful. I love it when you guys send me samples too. If you've got some samples you want me to try. There's a couple things I'm looking for in particular. I'll probably put it up on my Facebook page, maybe a couple other places, but you know, I love to try anything that you want me to try. So hit me up, let me know, and I'll give it a shot. Today, speaking of samples, I've got a wonderful pour here. Alan Ernst, big shout out. I appreciate it, my man. He sent me a 1981 Maker's Mark. Now, I've also here got a 2020 Maker's Mark. And I'll tell you, one of the things I like that Maker's Mark is doing right now is you can buy a free label. This label says, bottled exclusively for the Drink Pro. Hell yeah. Makes me happy. Might be cheesy. Might be a gimmick. I don't care. I like it. It makes me smile. I actually bought one for my dad, and it has his name on it, and it made him smile too. And, you know, that's a great idea. I mean, it's not a particularly expensive whiskey in the grand scheme of things, which there's some irony there I can talk a little bit about. But it's really cool to be able to have a whiskey with your name on it. Now, Maker's Mark built its name on being a little bit more pricey than its competition. That was one of the most successful ad ploys they did, was talking about the price. They did a series of ads that said it tastes expensive because it is. And at the time, it was a little bit more expensive than what was on the shelf for most people. You know, this was a time before the huge variety of whiskeys that we have today at different price points. People were not buying a $100 whiskey very often at that point. So Maker's Mark was really kind of pushing the boundaries of price, and they needed a way to separate themselves. Now, they did make a wheat whiskey here. Matter of fact, I'll tell you what, the wheated whiskey that's made by Maker's Mark is actually in part based on the new make that became Pappy Van Winkle. A lot of people don't realize that. Mr. Van Winkle shared his new make with the founder of the Maker's Mark distillery so that he could understand what a wheated whiskey should taste like. And then they sort of played with it and did some variations on it before they came up with the Maker's Mark lineup. Now, Maker's Mark is 70% corn, 14% malted barley, and 16% red winter wheat. So there's no rye in this at all. All of the rye has been replaced with the wheat. But the difference between a 1981 Maker's Mark and a 2020 Maker's Mark is really intriguing to me. I want to see how this pour has changed over time. Now, I will say, the current Maker's Mark is at 90 proof. The 81 Maker's Mark is also at 90 proof. So this is an apples to apples comparison. There was a time where Maker's Mark had said they were going to lower the proof on their whiskey, and they got so much backlash they decided not to do it. So let's go ahead and A/B compare these whiskeys. I'll make my plain glass here the Maker's Mark from 2020, and I'll make my Drink Pro glass here, which is still available, but not for very long. They're running out. The Maker's Mark 1981 pour. First, let's break open our wax seal, which is kind of fun, kind of gimmicky, kind of annoying. Depends on who you ask. I don't particularly give a shit about wax. I don't think it adds anything to the whiskey. I think it's just kind of a nuisance. But some people like it. It's pretty. If you look at the secondary market, for damn sure people like it. Oh, man. I did not know that Maker's Mark was a screw top. I don't know if that's a new invention or not, but wow. There's no better way to say I'm cheap whiskey than a screw top, so obviously they've abandoned that marketing strategy. I kind of feel shitty about that. Like, I want a cork, man. How are you gonna have a whiskey where you dip it in wax and then you put a fucking screw top on it? Come on. Shows you how much I drink Maker's Mark. I don't particularly care for it. I don't pick it out very often. It's not really my jam. All right, let's go ahead and pour out this 1981 Maker's Mark at the same proof. Oh, I can tell you right now, the smell coming off of that when I poured it, way different. This gave me no smell when I poured it. Now, first off, the color is slightly different. The modern Maker's Mark is a little bit lighter. It's more of an amber color, whereas I'm getting more of a ruby red from the 81 Maker's Mark. And I will say, I'm colorblind. Those colors don't mean anything. That's just what I see. What you see could be totally different. I don't know. Here, look at it. Could you tell what it was? I don't know. All right, let's go in on the nose. Let's start with the 2020 Maker's Mark nose. It's sweet. It's grain forward. I can smell the sweet wheat. Matter of fact, this reminds me a lot of the one taste I've had of 1792's sweet wheat. I've got another sample of that to do a review on, I believe, but I haven't done one yet. But this kind of reminds me of it just from my memory. This is sharper than I expect it to be. It's got a definite sharp grain note, almost like a vanilla extract with some corn in it. I can smell the wheat for sure. There's definitely this grain note. Hints of herbal notes, just quietly kind of hidden. I mean, this is not a particularly expensive whiskey in the grand scheme of things. I'm getting some maple syrup, some butterscotch note, a lot of sweet aromatics in this. And that does tend to come from the wheat whiskey. When you don't have any rye spice to sort of balance out the sweetness of the corn and the malted barley, you're just going to get a lot of sweet aromatics. Getting a little bit of butter pecan, just a hint of the nuttiness. But yeah, that's most of what I'm getting. I'm getting a lot of that sweet aromatics. I'm getting hints of butter pecan, just a touch maybe of an herbal note. Let's see what happens when I go to the 1981 Maker's Mark. Whoa, that smells really sharp. Not in a good way. One of the things that's important to remember about old pours is that a lot of times it's a gamble. Alan is a sort of connoisseur of them, and he will be the first one to tell you that sometimes it's a gamble. You don't know what's in those old bottles. You don't know how well it's preserved. It could taste really good. It could taste like garbage. It's really a gamble. Now, I would assume that what he gave me was a vetted sample. It was from some sort of barrel or container that he had vetted. But the nose on this is very, very sharp. It's metallic sharp too. I had an old Ancient Age that Alan sent me. And this was a similar note. I got that sort of sharp metallic note out of that as well. You get used to it over time. After a while, you kind of get comfortable with that sharpness. And the metallic note fades away. And I get this really deep, sweet caramel. It's a lot sharper and sweeter. Which is kind of surprising. When I go back to this on the nose after smelling this, it smells sort of like watered down fruitiness. I get a very generic grain sweetness on this, with maybe a hint of like apple. But going back to this old pour, it's super, super strong and sharp, especially at 90 proof. They're the same proof, but they're totally different whiskeys. It's kind of funny. I'm actually getting some similar notes. I'm getting a lot of the caramel. I'm getting the sweet corn. I'm getting some of that, getting sort of that pecan, that nuttiness. Everything's just a lot louder in this older pour. That's what's so interesting to me. If all the notes are there, they're just much louder. But if you're not used to the 1981 smell and you jump into it, it's just super strong and sharp and just not common for the modern nose and the modern palate. We've been softened. People always say, these kids are soft. They're trying to throw flack at the younger generation. But at least on the nose of this, I understand this is definitely sharper and stronger and more of a punch. I'm going to go ahead and taste the new version first, the 2020 version, then I'll come back to the 1981 for the palate. Yep, it's a wheater. Sweet corn, wheat grain. I get a lot more barrel spice than I expected, actually, pretty early on. Mid-palate, right away, you get this sort of barrel tannin note. Oh, and then there's this hint of this almost a sour cherry on the finish that shows up. It doesn't linger long, though. It comes and goes. It's these are not expensive whiskeys. Again, this is not a $150 bottle of whiskey, so it's not going to taste like one. But it comes and goes pretty quickly. Sweet grain. Sweet grain. Maybe a hint of a coffee note. Definitely some nuttiness mid-palate and some woodiness. The experience on this whiskey is so short. You get a sweetness, maybe a hint of some note, maybe some fruit, maybe some nuttiness, and then it goes into the wood, and then it goes away. It's so short and quick and just bam, bam, bam. That's why I feel like there's no finish, because I think it's really just super condensed. It's like, instead of going beginning, middle, end, it goes beginning, middle, end. Just like that, in one word. Let's try the 1981 Maker's Mark. Wow. Wow. That's incredible. I've been tasting several whiskeys before this, and almost all of them were brand new. They were new releases or something to that effect. This really shows what old whiskey can do. Old whiskey might not smell as good as new whiskey, but it tastes 1,000 times better. All of the whiskeys I've tried today, in fact, had some element of, I really like the smell, but the taste leaves something to be desired. The smell's better than the taste. That is the exact opposite of what I'm getting out of this Maker's Mark from 1981. The smell is a little bit strong and astringent, but there's some good notes in there. Then when I taste it, I only taste this wonderful, sweet, interesting, delicious note. It's like sweet red hots. You get the cinnamon, you get this candy sweetness. God, I'm amazed by that cinnamon note. The sweet candied cinnamon is so prominent. And you get a hint of nuttiness. It's still very short. It's still very short. I mean, this is still not going to be your interesting, complex, long finished whiskey. But in terms of like what it's trying to do, in terms of being a whiskey that's interesting and sweet and kind of hitting the mainstream goodness point, this is so much better than the 2024. You still get that cereal note right off the bat, but it's much quieter. You get a lot more of this sweet vanilla, and the vanilla is not the narrow, vanilla extract that I got from the 2020 Maker's Mark. This is a much broader, it's not vanilla bean, it's not rounded like a vanilla bean, but it's like a real vanilla flavor. The sweet cinnamon is so pervasive in the mid palate. It's just like a wonderful cinnamon candy, like a natural cinnamon candy, not like an artificial one. I said red hots before, but I really just don't have in my vocabulary the right word for like natural sweet cinnamon candy. That's what this is. Well, I tell you what, earlier in this video, I talked about the history of Maker's Mark's ad campaign and trying to separate itself as being more expensive but a higher end pour and bringing in aficionados from other areas. I get it. I get it with this 1981 pour. It tastes a lot more rich and sweet and interesting. The finish is still short. It's still not that long, complex woodiness that you would expect from different kinds of whiskey that are older and more complex. But man, it's just so much better, guys. It's just so much better. Going back to this, it smells bad. It smells sour. It smells thin. It smells like corn, maybe a hint of wheat. Very grainy. Oh, and all the taste is grain. This old 81 Makers, all the taste is sweet, caramel, candy. And this modern Makers, it straight up tastes like grain. And that's the difference. I mean, that's arguably why Maker's Mark isn't what it once was. It's not the leader in the whiskey at its price point. It was trying to claim it was expensive, and it was good because it was expensive. Can't do that anymore. It's not expensive. It's not good. But boy, if you can get your hands on a 1981 Maker's Mark pour, you should absolutely have one. Buy it. Give it to me. Oh, man. I'm going to keep drinking these whiskeys and having a good time. You all keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.